The most important early thinker during the medieval era is St. Augustine. It is not an overstatement to say that the world that we are living in today would look completely different if St. Augustine made different choices during his early life. Augustine was actually born to two parents. His mother, Monica, who is made a saint herself, Santa Monica, California, Saint Monica, just because she got Augustine to convert to Christianity. That was her good deed that got her sainthood. She was an early Christian. They were living on the north coast of Africa. But Augustine's father was a Manichaeist. The Manichaeists believed that there were two cosmic forces, one of good and one of evil. And that at some point, at the end of time, good and evil would duke it out, and we don't know who's going to win. And Augustine, living at the time that he did, looked at the world, looked at all of the suffering in the world, and he was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. Terrible things are happening everywhere. So it makes a lot more sense to me that good and evil are both equally powerful, rather than what my mom keeps telling me, which is that, look, God has your back on this one. God is all loving and is all powerful, and that everything will be okay at the end. If that's true, me, living on the north coast of Africa, why did a few generations ago the Roman Empire burn the Carthaginian Empire to the ground and salt the earth so that nothing would ever grow there? Why would an all-loving God let something like that happen? So during Augustine's early life was very compelled by his father's Manichaeist religion. But Augustine, he goes to Rome, and he learns from Neoplatonist teachers. There are some people during the transition from the Greek to the medieval era, people like Plotinus or Plotinus, those are both acceptable pronunciations, much as Augustine and Augustine are both acceptable pronunciations. You'll be okay no matter what pronunciation you want to choose. But he goes to Rome and he starts learning from those Neoplatonic philosophies, seeing the way that Plato's philosophy was in a very early and in a very crude way being mapped onto Christianity. And if you remember our conversation about the forms, this is what causes it to click for Augustine. Oh, so the world of appearances. Yeah, there's all kinds of really nasty things happening everywhere. Bad things are happening to good people all of the time. But that's the world of appearances. That's not the world of forms. That world that exists beyond the world of appearances that we have, that's the realm of God. So when we're looking at things and we think that they're evil, maybe it's really not. There is some evil demon out there that has a 50-50 chance to win existence at the end of time, but really that we're just perceiving things in the wrong way, that we as limited human people aren't able to see what God's plan is. And it's at that time, during his study of the Neoplatonists in Rome, that Augustine decides to convert to Christianity. And he becomes the primary attack dog for early Christianity. So the Christianity that you may very well believe looks the way that it does because what Augustine does during his life is basically squelch out any of the popular heresies during that era of time. The Christianity we have today looks the way that it does because of St. Augustine. So all of the world of Christianity and all of the Christian nations of the world all end up the way they do because Augustine decides his father's religion didn't make sense from that Platonic perspective. So if you get one thing from our discussion of St. Augustine, it is how the problem of evil informed his insights. Now, when Augustine looked at the world and the problem of evil in his youth, he saw good and evil both being equally powerful. But once he had that Platonic perspective, seeing that evil is just a problem in the world of appearances, he actually describes this as a pervasion of the good. So it's not that anything is actually evil. It's actually that things are just increasingly far away from the goodness of God. There's just less good there. It's not evil, it's just less good. So at the top of all existence, you've got God, as good as it gets. Take a step down, we've got some angels, maybe some seraphim, all of them. They're all up there too. Then you've got humans. You know, we're fallen a little bit away from the goodness of God. And then after that, you would have things like animals. Then you have things like plants. And then all of those rocks that you are walking along in your life, all of that where there's no will or agency at all, there's no goodness of God there. You wouldn't call dirt evil. But we would say, or what Augustine would say, is that something like those inanimate objects that we just have all around us are simply lacking in the goodness of God. We don't call them evil. They're just lacking in the goodness of God. So it's not that evil even exists for Augustine. It's that things are just increasingly far away from the good of God. That's the interpretation that Augustine has for why we perceive there to be bad things in the world. We just can't see the plan. That's the argument that Augustine is making. But how do we know that? Augustine's epistemology, something we'll be talking a lot about in the next unit, is called illumination. Augustine thinks that there are certain things that it is miraculous that we are actually able to understand. He says that certain things cannot be knowable to humans without God because we're too small of creatures to know it. The fact that we could have a concept like infinity in the first place is evidence there must be some infinite God out there somewhere. But he would also point to things like the fact that I can have this conversation with all of you as another bit of evidence of illumination. So he uses language as an example for illumination. Everything that you learn, like when you're a very little kid, you learn by just pointing at things. You just point at stuff. And then one of your parents says like, chair, book, turtle, green, whatever it might be. But whenever you're pointing at something, Augustine thinks, isn't it miraculous that we are actually able to make sense of that thing? So if I were to just take a nice coffee cup, for instance, and I point at it, and if you're a young child and I say, oh, it's green, how is it that you know that I'm talking about the color of this object rather than the coffee cup itself? Right? The fact that we can learn all of this stuff through ostensive learning, picking things up step by step along the way, Augustine says that's amazing that we can do that sort of stuff. That doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from something that is beyond you as a person. The fact that we can learn language at all is evidence that God is out there somewhere guiding our path along the way. So in a nutshell, that's what St. Augustine's philosophy is all about. Explaining to us how Platonic philosophy is able to be mapped onto Christianity. That the world of the forms that are out there for Plato, Augustine just calls that's the city of God. And he's writing at an era when Rome is being sacked by Ostrogoths and Visigoths. Rome is falling. Augustine says the city of man is falling, but worry not. The city of God is eternal, and it is unchanging, and it will always be there for you no matter how bad the appearances of things get.